Let's take a look at shapes and materials in thinking particles. We've got our TP already created out here, and we'll go ahead and use the keyboard shortcuts to get into the UI. Switch our viewport around. Let's go ahead and create our first rule, and we'll right click and use the right click create menu to come down here to operators, generator, and use particle draw. And particle draw is going to let us go ahead and draw 3 particles out here. And we'll go ahead and scrub to update. We'll come up to master dynamic, turn off edit on the fly, and we're going to turn on show mesh so that we can see the mesh. And remember, we turn off edit on the fly so that we get real-time updates. And so now let's go ahead and come over here to the operators into the shape category, and you can see we have 6 different operators. Blurp is for doing shape to shape, kind of automatic fragmenting. We're not going to take a look at him just yet. He's going to have his own special video. Geom instance is when you want to use geometry inside the scene as your source geometry. We'll go ahead and disable him for right now. Next up is shape blend. Shape blend is going to allow you to just do kind of a size scale morph between several different pieces of geometry. We'll take a look at that here in a little bit. Actually, we'll go ahead and alt right click to get rid of that one. The next one here we have is fragment. Fragment is used for fragmenting a mesh, and that's a special topic. We'll take a look at that later. Metashape is going to be looked at here. This is a kind of a blobby formula. It's going to allow us to use particles to create a blob mesh. And last but not least, we have a standard shape, which is probably the easiest and simplest shape material. It's got all the standard kind of basic material assignments here. I'm sorry, shape assignments. Let's go ahead and we'll connect standard shape and then also connect geom instance. And we'll double click geom instance to collapse in there. Now we'll go ahead and scrub, and it doesn't look like any mesh is being created, but actually if we zoom way in we can see it is. That's because particle draw does not actually have a size parameter to assign these particles, and there's no size assignment on standard shape either. To assign a size, we'll come up to the operators into standard and use a size operator, make that connection. And now as we go ahead and increase this size, we can obviously see that there. We'll go ahead and switch this actually to cubes. And we'll change our camera a little bit. You can see our TP, when we created it, it came out with this kind of greenish blue color. We'll go ahead and render, and these particles are going to actually use that initial material color. So you can see we're using final render with some global illumination. Let's take a look here. We're going to go ahead and first of all, in this first slot, we'll go ahead and pick the multi-thinking, the thinking particles. It shows us the multi-thinking 01 material, and you can see it has this first slot here for thinking 01. This is kind of the default catch-all material. It's going to apply to particles unless you specifically assign a material. It's highly recommended not to modify anything in the multi-thinking material. Just know that this exists. Anytime you need to modify a material, you're either going to want to go ahead and create a new material here and then assign it somehow, but do not modify the multi-thinking 01. It keeps a link to the existing materials that you've assigned and will update them automatically. It does its own housekeeping, so it's best to just let it do that and just go back to your original material and modify it. In this case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a red material. Drag him up here, and then we'll just drop red into standard shapes material slot. And we want to use an instance of that so that whenever we make changes to this slot here, it's going to update here. Okay, so now we've got a red material assigned to these particles, and they're going to go ahead and render red now. There they are. And let's take a look. Something else we have available in standard shape is a checkbox for final render instance. And because we're also using the final render renderer, that's required in order to use that. What'll happen is if you have several hundred or thousand or million particles out in the scene, it's going to treat each of these pieces of geometry as an instance, and it's going to be able to save a lot in terms of memory and geometry processing. So if you have say a 4 GB machine and you're using a million particles, you may have difficulty rendering all of those unless you actually have this instancing. and final render. So it's an extremely powerful render, very high quality, highly recommended.